The night felt heavy with rain, the kind that soaked to the bone, as if the world itself was grieving. Inside a cold, sterile shelter, a dog lay trembling on the cold concrete floor. His fur was matted, eyes wide and pleading, but it was the last night before his fate would be sealed. A needle. The end of a long journey of neglect. His name was Max, and he had no voice, no choice. A life spent abandoned in the streets, his only home a pile of trash. The shelter's harsh fluorescent lights hummed overhead, illuminating the sorrow in his eyes. A shadow loomed over him, and the sound of footsteps grew louder. The shelter worker, a man with tired eyes, glanced at his clipboard. One more animal to euthanize before closing hours. It was routine. But then, a small hand appeared in the doorway, a voice cutting through the silence. A girl, her eyes locked with Max's, and in that moment, something shifted. Something was about to change. Show your love, hit like, share, and subscribe for more. The shelter was dimly lit, its cold, sterile atmosphere hanging thick like the kind of fog that never fully lifts. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant, masking the lingering scent of despair. Max lay on the cold concrete floor, his matted fur clinging to his thin frame. He had seen better days, but those were far behind him. His body trembled, not just from the chill in the air, but from the fear that gnawed at his insides. His once vibrant eyes, full of life and mischief, now reflected only resignation. He had long since given up hoping for the warmth of a home, the comfort of a gentle hand, the sound of a voice telling him he mattered. The shelter was a place of finality. The walls, grey and unyielding, seemed to echo with the silence of so many forgotten souls. Max had heard it all before. The clicking of the workers' boots as they walked past his cage, the soft sighs of those who knew what awaited them at the end of the day. He could feel the tension in the air, the weight of decisions made, the countless animals who had come through these doors with their own stories and had left them behind with a final breath. The shelter worker, a man with tired eyes and hands that had done this too many times before, stood by the door, his clipboard clutched tightly in his hand. His eyes flickered from the paperwork to Max and back again, but there was no hint of sympathy. Max was just another number, another animal to be put down by the end of the shift. A faint rustle of paper, the flicking of a pen against the clipboard, and a deep sigh. The shelter worker's gaze shifted from the clock on the wall to the animal before him. It was nearing the end of the day, and Max was due for his injection. One final injection that would send him to sleep forever. The worker's hands were steady, like they always were before performing the final act, but a weariness had settled deep into his bones. He knew this was his job. It had to be done. There were too many strays, too many sick animals, and too little space in the world for them all. The shelter worker had long stopped feeling the sting of each death. It was simply a matter of routine. Max looked up at him, his eyes wide, filled with that silent plea for survival. But the worker didn't see it. Not anymore. He had become numb to it all, the desperate eyes, the silent cries for help. He flipped through the pages of his clipboard, muttering something to himself as he checked the final box. His fingers hovered over the phone, ready to dial the number for the final procedure. The click of the pen was a sound Max would never forget, the signal that his life was slipping away. He closed his eyes, the coldness of the floor pressing against his belly, and waited. But then, just as the worker reached for the phone, the door to the shelter opened. The sound of footsteps echoed through the empty room. For a moment, everything seemed to stop. The air shifted. The worker glanced up, irritated at the interruption, but then froze. The figure standing in the doorway wasn't another weary shelter worker. It was a child, a small girl, no older than 8 or 9, with a bright red raincoat that contrasted sharply against the gray of the shelter. Her face was framed by wet strands of hair, her eyes wide with both determination and innocence. She looked at Max, and her gaze softened. She could see him. She could see the life in him, the silent longing, the fear. Max's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't felt seen in a long time. She wasn't just looking at him like everyone else had. She wasn't looking through him, past him, or around him. She saw him. And for the first time in what felt like forever, he felt like he mattered. The shelter worker, still frozen by the sight of the girl, cleared his throat awkwardly. "Can I help you?" His voice was thick with the weight of a long day, and he tried to mask the irritation with a forced smile. But the girl didn't seem to notice. Her focus was entirely on Max, her face creased with concern. "I heard about the dog," she said, her voice small but steady. "Is this him?" Max's ears perked up. He hadn't heard anyone speak to him like that in a long time. The worker nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "Yes, that's him. His name's Max. He's scheduled for euthanasia." The girl took a small, hesitant step forward, her heart racing in her chest. She had seen so many dogs like Max, the ones no one wanted, the ones society had abandoned. But Max was different. There was something in his eyes that spoke to her, something that tugged at her heart. She could feel it in her bones, that quiet voice that urged her to act, to do something, anything, to save him. Max watched her, his breath shallow, his eyes never leaving hers. He wanted to bark, to leap to his feet, to show her that he was still there, still fighting. But his body was too weak, too worn from the years of neglect. He could only watch as she approached, her hand slowly extending toward him. "Can I pet him?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly as she crouched down in front of his cage. The shelter worker stared at her for a moment, his face unreadable, before he sighed. "Go ahead. He's not going anywhere." The girl reached through the bars, her small fingers trembling as they brushed against Max's matted fur. She felt his body flinch, the muscles beneath his coat tensing with uncertainty, but there was something in the way he looked at her that made her heart swell. This wasn't just any dog. This was a creature that had been abandoned, forgotten, and left to die. But now, for the first time, he wasn't alone. "Hi, Max," she whispered softly, as though speaking to him would make him feel less alone. The dog's eyes softened, his tail flickering at the base. It was small, just a hint of movement, but it was enough. He was responding. She smiled, a small tear slipping down her cheek. She didn't know if she could save him, if she could change his fate. But in this moment, it felt like she could. "I'll come back for you," she whispered, her voice fierce with determination. She didn't know how, she didn't know when, but she would come back. Max would have a chance. She would give him that chance. As she stood to leave, she glanced over her shoulder at the worker, her voice firm. "Please don't put him down." "Not yet. Give me a little more time." The worker said nothing, just nodded slowly, but she could see the uncertainty in his eyes. He had seen it all before. He had seen so many people come and go, promising to save the animals, and yet they never came back. But the girl wasn't like the others. She was different. She would come back. As she left the shelter, the rain fell harder. But in her heart the storm had passed, and she knew that somehow she would find a way to save Max. He was worth saving. The following day was quiet, almost too quiet. The storm that had raged through the night had finally begun to let up, but the heavy clouds still hung in the sky, casting everything in a muted, grey light. Emma sat at the kitchen table, staring at the half-finished homework in front of her, though her thoughts were miles away. Her fingers tapped restlessly against the tabletop, echoing the anxiety that churned in her chest. She couldn't stop thinking about Max. The way his eyes had locked onto hers, the way his tail had given that faint flicker of hope. The memory lingered, haunting her in a way she couldn't shake. "Emma, honey, you need to focus." Her mother's voice broke through the fog of her thoughts. Emma blinked, realizing she hadn't heard a word her mother had said for the past 5 minutes. She looked up at her, her mother's brow furrowed in concern. "Are you okay?" Emma hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to explain the storm inside her. "I'm just thinking about the dog," she admitted quietly, not looking her mother in the eye. Her mother's expression softened. "Sweetheart, you know we can't take in every stray dog we see, right? It's not just about wanting to help. There are practicalities we have to consider." Her voice was kind but firm, the same tone she used when Emma had asked for something that seemed impossible. "We're a busy family. We have enough on our plate already." Emma bit her lip, the weight of her mother's words settling into her chest like a stone. She knew the arguments, knew the reasons why adopting Max was a bad idea. But none of them mattered. She had seen his face. She had seen the pain in his eyes. And that was enough to make her heart ache with the need to help him. I know it's not easy, Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I can't just walk away. He needs me, Mom. He needs us. Her mother's gaze softened, but she didn't respond immediately. The silence stretched between them, thick with the unspoken understanding of a parent who had tried to reason with a child but knew, deep down, that their daughter's determination wasn't going to waver. Please, Mom, Emma added, her voice cracking slightly. I can take care of him. I'll do everything. I'll clean up after him, I'll walk him, I'll make sure he's fed. I'll do it all. I promise. Her hands clenched into fists on the table, the desperation in her eyes undeniable. Her mother let out a long sigh, rubbing her temples as if the weight of the world had just landed on her shoulders. Emma, this isn't about you doing chores or cleaning up after a dog. It's about our lives. We're not in a position to take on another responsibility. Your father's working overtime, and I've got enough to manage with everything else. Adding a dog, it would just be too much. Emma swallowed hard, feeling the sting of her mother's refusal like a slap. She knew her mom was right in some ways. Her parents did work hard, their lives were hectic, and adding a dog into the mix seemed like an insurmountable task. But she couldn't bring herself to let go of the thought of Max, the dog who was waiting for her, whose life depended on her decision. She couldn't just walk away. She turned her gaze to the window, where the last remnants of the storm were clearing, leaving behind a world washed clean, yet still grey. Emma closed her eyes, and in that brief moment, she imagined a different world, a world where Max was with her, safe and loved, curled up at her feet as she read or worked on her homework. She imagined him sitting by the door when her dad came home, wagging his tail in excitement, a constant, loyal companion. She could picture it all so clearly, the life they would have together. But the reality was harsh, and she knew it. There were bills to pay, responsibilities that couldn't be ignored. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. It's not just about wanting to help. There are practicalities to consider. With a heavy heart, Emma knew she had to find another way. She couldn't let Max down, not when she was the only one who cared enough to save him. She couldn't let him die alone in that cold shelter. There had to be something she could do. That night after dinner, Emma sat at the kitchen table again, her laptop open in front of her. She searched the internet for ways to raise money. Fundraisers, local organizations that might be able to help, grants for animal rescue. She pored over every option, feeling the frustration building with each dead-end link. Her fingers flew over the keyboard, her heart racing as the weight of her mission pressed down on her chest. She paused for a moment, feeling the exhaustion creep up on her. But then her mind refocused. She wasn't going to give up. Max was worth this fight. She thought back to the shelter, the way he had looked at her, his eyes wide with hope, as if he was already trusting her to save him. Emma couldn't turn her back on that trust. The idea came to her suddenly. Why not ask for help from others? Why not reach out to people who might care, people who might see the same thing in Max that she did? She could set up a crowdfunding campaign. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot she had. Without wasting another second, she opened a new tab on her browser and created the campaign. Her heart pounded in her chest as she typed out the story of Max, telling people how he had been abandoned, how he had suffered, and how, against all odds, she had come to care for him, knowing he deserved a second chance. Her fingers trembled as she clicked publish. Unsure of what would come next, she didn't know if anyone would donate. She didn't know if anyone would even care, but she had to try. For Max. The next day, Emma took a deep breath and shared the campaign link with her friends and family. She posted it on social media, pleading for donations, for help, for any support she could find. The days dragged on with little response, and doubt began to creep in again. Maybe her mother was right. Maybe this was all too much. But then, a small miracle happened. By the end of the week, the first donation came in, a $20 contribution from a friend's aunt. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Slowly, others followed. Her classmates, her neighbors, people who she barely knew, all started to chip in. The donations weren't large, but they were enough to keep the spark of hope alive. Emma didn't have much time. The clock was ticking. She still needed more funds to cover the shelter fees, the vaccinations, the supplies that would make Max's new life comfortable. But with every donation that came in, with every encouraging message she received, Emma's resolve grew stronger. She wasn't alone in this fight anymore. Max wasn't alone. And for the first time since she had entered the shelter, Emma felt a glimmer of hope in her chest. She wasn't just a little girl anymore, waiting for someone else to save Max. She was his champion. And she would do whatever it took to bring him home. The next few days felt like a blur, each one blending into the other as Emma scrambled to keep the crowdfunding campaign alive. Her phone buzzed constantly with new notifications, small donations, kind words from strangers who believed in her mission, and people sharing her story. But no matter how many times she checked the campaign page, the amount raised still felt too far from what she needed. Every night, as the house settled into silence and the darkness crept in, Emma would sit at the kitchen table, eyes fixed on the numbers on the screen, her heart heavy with the weight of the task at hand. She had made so much progress, but it never felt like enough. Her mother, though more supportive than before, still maintained a cautious distance. "You've raised more than I expected, sweetheart," she would say with a smile. But her voice always carried a hint of doubt. Emma could see the concern in her mother's eyes. Concern that the money might not come through in time. Concern that they might be overestimating what they could handle. Emma understood. Her mother's life was full of responsibility, full of the weight of bills, schedules, and deadlines. The idea of adding a dog into the mix, especially one with such a complicated past, was a daunting thought. But Emma wasn't giving up. She couldn't. Not after everything she had seen. One afternoon, as Emma sat at the computer trying to make another post, a message popped up in her inbox. It was from a woman named Sarah. She introduced herself as an animal welfare advocate, someone who had seen Emma's campaign and wanted to help. Emma's heart leaped as she read the message. "I know it's not much, but I think I might be able to help you get closer to your goal." Emma's hands shook as she typed a response. They exchanged a few messages, and Sarah explained that she had connections with local businesses that might be willing to sponsor part of the adoption costs in exchange for some publicity. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was a chance. Emma had to take it. She couldn't wait any longer. The next day after school, Emma set out with a stack of flyers she had printed, each one featuring Max's story and a link to her campaign. She went door to door in her neighborhood, asking for donations or any help people could offer. Most people turned her away, or at best, smiled and wished her luck. But she couldn't stop. She couldn't afford to. Every step she took, every person she spoke to, felt like a step closer to Max. "Excuse me, ma'am," Emma asked one older woman, holding out a flyer. "I'm raising money to adopt a dog from the shelter. His name is Max, and he's been abandoned. I was wondering if you might be able to help." The woman took the flyer, her hands soft and wrinkled with age. She scanned it quickly, her eyes flicking up to Emma with a hint of curiosity. "I've got a soft spot for animals," the woman said, reaching into her purse. "I can't donate much, but I'll give you what I can." She handed Emma a crisp 10 bill, her eyes lingering on the girl's face. Emma thanked her profusely, her heart swelling with gratitude. The 10 wasn't much in the grand scheme of things, but it was more than she had expected. The day stretched on like this, a series of small victories, each one leaving Emma feeling more exhausted and yet more determined. By the time she returned home, her feet ached and her spirits were beginning to flag. She had raised just over 200 from her neighborhood efforts, a small dent in the total she needed, but it was something. Every dollar brought her closer to Max. That night after dinner, Emma sat with her parents in the living room. Her father had been unusually quiet, staring at the television without really watching it, his mind clearly elsewhere. Emma knew he was thinking about the dog, thinking about how much of a burden it might be, even though he hadn't said it directly. "Dad," Emma began, her voice steady but quiet. "I'm going to get Max." She said it like a promise, like something that was already decided. Her father looked up, his brow furrowing. "Emma, I've told you before, we can't just take in a dog. It's not as simple as raising money. It's a lot of work, and we don't even know if Max will adjust well to our home. He's been through a lot. Emma's mother shifted in her seat, rubbing her temples. We've talked about this, sweetheart. I understand you want to help, but we can't make a decision based on a campaign. We have to be realistic. The word stung, but Emma wasn't backing down. She had never been more sure of anything in her life. I know it's hard, she said, her voice calm but firm. But I can do this. I'm not asking you to do it all. I'm asking for your support. I'm asking you to trust me. She paused, glancing between her parents. I know it's a big responsibility, but I love him, and I can give him the life he deserves. Her father's expression softened, but there was still a flicker of doubt in his eyes. We'll talk about it. Okay, he said after a long pause, his voice not unkind but still hesitant. Emma nodded, grateful for the small opening. She knew it wasn't a full approval, but it was a start. She would continue to prove herself step by step. She wasn't about to let Max down. Not now. Not ever. The next morning, as Emma prepared for another day of school, she received a message from Sarah. There was good news. One of the local pet stores had agreed to sponsor part of Max's adoption fee, covering the costs of his first few vaccinations and basic supplies. The funds were still a bit short, but they were closer than they had ever been. Emma's heart soared as she read the message over and over again, barely able to contain her excitement. She rushed to the shelter, her legs moving faster than her thoughts, her heart racing with anticipation. When she arrived, she explained the progress she had made, the amount of money she had raised, and the sponsors who were backing her up. The shelter worker, who had initially been cold and indifferent, now looked at her with a flicker of respect. "All right," he said, after a long pause, glancing at his clipboard. "Well, hold off on the procedure for now. But you've got to act fast. We can't keep him here forever." Emma nodded, her eyes locked on Max's cage, where he sat waiting, his eyes still wide and full of unspoken hope. "I'm going to bring you home," she whispered under her breath. "Just hold on a little longer." The day Emma had been waiting for finally arrived, but the storm hadn't quite passed. The sky was still heavy with clouds, thick with the promise of rain, and the air hung with a sharp, electric tension that made Emma's skin prickle. She stood outside the shelter, the cold wind biting at her face, her heart pounding in her chest. Every breath she took felt too shallow, too fast, as if the weight of everything that had led her here was pressing in on her. She had raised enough money. She had fought for Max. Now, the only thing left was getting him out of that cage and into her arms. The shelter's door opened with a creak, and Emma's breath caught in her throat as she saw the worker walking toward her. He didn't look at her with the same indifference as before, but there was still a hesitation in his eyes. Maybe he had seen too many promises fall short. Maybe he had seen too many people who wanted to help but couldn't follow through. But Emma was different. She had made a promise, and she intended to keep it. "Emma," the worker called out, his voice breaking through the heavy silence. "The paperwork's all set. You can take him now." Her heart leapt, and she quickly stepped forward, her fingers tightening around the strap of her bag as she walked past him. The shelter worker led her through the back hallway, and as she walked, she felt a rush of emotions collide within her, excitement, fear, relief. She was about to bring Max home. But would he be okay? Would he trust her? As they approached the cage, Emma felt her stomach twist. Max was lying in the corner, his back turned to them, his head low. He had been waiting in this place for so long, and yet, somehow, she knew he hadn't given up. Not entirely. She had seen it in his eyes when they met. "Max," she whispered, kneeling down to his level. She couldn't keep the tremor out of her voice. "It's me, Emma. I'm here to take you home." He turned his head slowly, as if the weight of the world rested on his tired neck. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, the whole world seemed to still. She saw the wariness in his gaze, the hesitation that mirrored her own, but she also saw something else, something fragile and hopeful. Max was afraid, but there was a flicker of trust deep within him. Emma smiled softly, her heart swelling in her chest. "You're not alone anymore," she said gently, her hand reaching out toward him. She let him come to her, allowing him to sniff her fingers first before softly rubbing his head. His fur was rough and tangled, and his body trembled beneath her touch, but he didn't pull away. She stood up slowly, feeling the weight of Max's trust as she carefully unlatched the cage door. "Come on, Max," she whispered, her voice soft but steady. "Let's go home." Max hesitated, looking at her with a mix of uncertainty and longing. Then, slowly, he stood up on shaky legs and limped out of the cage, his eyes never leaving hers. Emma's heart swelled with relief, and she leaned down to gently guide him forward. He stepped cautiously, as if unsure that the world outside the shelter could truly be different. But with every step, Emma felt the bond between them grow stronger, the promise of a future becoming a little more real. The shelter worker watched them quietly, his hands clasped together in front of him. He said nothing, but there was something in the way he looked at them that spoke volumes. Emma could see the small flicker of hope in his eyes, too. He had seen many dogs come and go, many people who promised to give them a second chance, but none like Emma. There was a fierceness in her determination, a love in her eyes that couldn't be ignored. "Good luck, Emma," he said quietly as she reached the door, his voice soft with something like respect. "I hope he has a good life." "Thank you," Emma said, her voice thick with emotion. She couldn't speak for too long, or she would start crying. She had done it. She had saved Max. But the journey wasn't over yet. It was only just beginning. The ride home was quiet. The car hummed along the wet road, the sound of rain tapping against the windows in a steady rhythm. Max lay in the back seat, his body curled up as much as it could be, his head resting on Emma's jacket. She kept her eyes on the road, but every few seconds, she would glance at him in the rearview mirror. His eyes were closed now, the tension in his body easing with each passing mile. He was letting go of the fear, inch by inch, trusting her with the parts of himself that had been broken. When they pulled into the driveway, Emma's heart swelled with pride. This was it, the moment that would change everything for both of them. Max was home. He didn't have to be alone anymore. She opened the car door and stepped out, gently coaxing Max to follow. He hesitated for a moment, his paws stiff on the pavement, but then he took a tentative step forward. He was still unsure, still holding on to the remnants of his past, but he was trying. And for Emma, that was enough. Inside the house, Emma led Max to his new bed, a soft blanket laid out in the corner of the living room. She had set everything up the night before, his food and water bowls, his toys, his new collar with a tag that read Max loved and safe. She knelt down beside him, her heart full of love and determination. "You're safe now," she whispered, rubbing his back gently. "This is your home, and we're going to take care of you. I promise." Max let out a soft sigh, his eyes closing in contentment as he curled up on the blanket. Emma sat beside him for a long time, just watching him as he began to settle in, his body relaxing, his breathing evening out. It was a small victory, a simple moment, but it was enough. She had done it. She had saved him. And in the process, she had saved herself. Emma's life would never be the same again. She had made a choice to fight for something she loved, to stand up for an animal who needed her. And in doing so, she had learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the best way to heal is to help someone else heal first. As she sat there with Max, her hand gently resting on his side, she realized that this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning of a new chapter, one that they would write together, and no matter what came next, she would always fight for him, just as he had fought for her. The days that followed felt like a gentle unfolding of a dream. The house, once quiet and predictable, was now filled with the sound of Max's paws clicking on the hardwood floors, the soft rustle of his fur as he curled up by Emma's feet at night. Emma had never known a dog could bring so much peace, so much joy into a home. It was as if Max had always belonged there, and now, at last, he was where he needed to be. Every morning Max would wake up beside her, his eyes slowly opening, his tail giving a tentative wag. It was a small gesture, but to Emma it meant the world. She would greet him with a soft, "Good morning, Max," and he would stretch, yawning as though he was remembering what it felt like to be cared for. She had watched him grow stronger every day, his once thin frame filling out, his eyes becoming brighter, his movements more confident. And with each passing day, he seemed to trust her more, his guard slowly coming down. There were moments, though, when he would flinch at loud noises or cower when someone reached too quickly toward him. But Emma was patient. She understood. His past wasn't something that could be erased overnight. But every time he ran to her when she called, every time his tail wagged just a little faster, it felt like he was telling her, "I'm okay. You saved me. You really did." One afternoon, as they sat together in the backyard, the sun filtering through the trees and casting soft shadows across the grass, Emma leaned back in her chair, watching Max chase after a ball. His energy was different now, free, uninhibited, joyful. Emma smiled, a sense of fulfillment settling into her heart. She had done it. She had kept her promise. Max trotted back over, the ball in his mouth, his eyes sparkling with the joy of a life that was finally his. He dropped the ball at her feet, and Emma laughed as she picked it up and threw it again, watching him run after it with that same youthful exuberance he had once lost. It wasn't just Max who had changed in these few weeks. Emma had grown too. She had learned that saving a life wasn't just about taking action. It was about patience, persistence, and love. It was about understanding that even the smallest gesture, even the smallest hope, could lead to something beautiful. As the evening sky turned to dusk, Emma sat down beside Max, who had curled up on the grass beside her. She stroked his fur gently, her heart full. There was still so much to do, so many memories to make, but they had come so far together. "You're home now," Emma whispered, her voice full of quiet joy. "This is your forever?" And as she sat there, with Max by her side, Emma knew she had found something even more precious than a rescued dog. She had found a family. One that wasn't made of blood but of heart. The future was uncertain, but with Max, she knew she could face anything. They would walk through life side by side, always with love, always with hope. And that, Emma realized, was enough.